Two times, guys. Yeah, that's my crew out there. Yeah, you gotta love them, eh? And your only fans are your crew. Well, welcome to the first edition of Mike's Mail. The point behind Mike's Mail, it's first edition, let me explain to you, is I get a lot of mail. And I figure if one person is asking this question, then there has to be dozens and sometimes hundreds more asking the same thing. So I thought, well, why don't we cover that, because we've pretty much taught you all the knots that you need to know. And I'd like to first off say we're moving on to iTunes now. So you can download these onto your iPhone, your iPad, new brilliant iPad technology coming out, and or straight onto your iTunes or your Apple TV. So we're compatible with all those formats. Vimeo and Blip also. So you can find them at these websites here. First off, I guess it's April 4th, 2010. All the cool folks say 2010, not 2010. And if you haven't heard by now, most of you have, that Steve House took a pretty big whipper on Mount Temple. And those of you who don't know who Steve House is, Steve is probably the most famous mountain guide in the world. And I would be second. And now that Steve is going to be taking a time off to recover from his injuries, that makes me first. And I can really feel the responsibility of being first, right? I mean, suddenly, being second, you're in the sidelines, no big deal. Then all of a sudden now I'm number one. And the responsibility of that is kind of starting to weigh on me. Anyhow, if you don't know, Steve took a whipper on Mount Temple, which is located right next to Lake Louise. And it's this big massif of a peak. It's the biggest in the range. It's over 11,000 feet. And on the north face, there's a number of climbing routes. And the one they were on was called the Greenwood Lock, which is quite a hard route, especially for this time of year. It's under winter conditions. So you can see here, looking pretty summery and looks reasonably friendly, even though it's not that friendly. The rock is of pretty poor quality. But anyhow, Steve and his partner, Mr. Miller, took a whipper, pulled some gear, I guess anywhere from 80 to 100 feet as the gear pulled before he came to a stop. His buddy pulled him over to the side, and since they were looking straight at the ski hill, you have cell coverage there, and they were able to get hold of Parks Canada. And Parks Canada managed to do a heli sling rescue. And here in Canada, if you're coming here climbing and you're doing big alpine stuff, you're very, very fortunate to have Parks Canada on your team here, because simply by paying your parks fees, that covers your insurance. At this point, they're not playing God in any way. They're just they come out and rescue everybody. They may charge you if you get to have your dog rescued, as some people did last year, but that's besides the point. So anyhow, my condolences to Steve. Get better. I'm glad that you came out there. From what I understand, Steve had a broken pelvis, punctured lung, some spinal processes broke off, but he doesn't require surgery and is stable and going to be bouncing back as he knows he can. And you can have your crown back as soon as you get on your feet, Steve, if you're watching. All right. So the letter for this week comes from Plapides, and it's concerning friction knots for glacier travel. Which, I had this sitting up on the counter, and my wife got a good chuckle out of it. And she's a mountain guide also, and she well, let me just explain. Let's read it first. Hey Mike, I was up on the Wapta a few days ago, and my buddy and I were roping up. It was just the two of us on the rope, and I remembered one of the videos where Terry explains about friction knots. So I tied a bunch between us. My friend pointed out that the knots would get in the way of any 3-to-1 system that would need to be rigged up for rescue. What are your thoughts on this? And I figure that if I don't add the knots, then we can both get pulled in and then forget about any rescue, since we're both at the bottom of the hole. Thanks, Paul. P.S. I would love to see a video or get some general tips about short roping?
I like to prepare some rescue coils, extra rope that will be used only in a case of emergency. I lap coil the rope and then quickly put a couple of wraps, put the bight of rope through and flip it over. I can stick that in my pack. Okay, if I'm traveling with two on the rope and my partner is a lot bigger than I'm going to need some help to slow him down, or if a mate, so I will tie some friction knots in the rope, merely figure eights or overhand knots every 60 centimeters to meter apart. These knots are designed to cut into the edge of the crevasse. They'll also, if you fall in a crevasse, give you points to hang on to and aid pull yourself out.
Well, first off, Paul, let's cover your 3-to-1 rescue system. You're right. Those knots would get in the way to a 3-to-1 rescue system. And I think that's where my wife got a chuckle, is because here in Canada, we tend to use a drop loop system. So what we mean by that is we carry coils, rescue coils, in our packs, front and back, especially when we have two people. And that would allow you to tie the knots in between, and they wouldn't hinder you in a rescue. But I can understand, because the United States, Britain, they tend to use the 3-to-1, which is, to me, in my mind, is more of a straightforward rock rescue system, right? The drop loop system used here in Canada, I pulled this off the ACMG website, and you can see when they drop the loop, you gain more of a mechanical advantage instantly, and those friction knots that you have in between you and your partner actually don't bind back into the lip of the crevasse, and they don't screw up, your raise when you go to take another bite on your raise or your system. You can find more information about this at the ACMG website, acmg.ca. Wander through there, and they have actually quite a few tips on mountaineering skills and quite an extensive bit of information on crevasse rescue, so it'd be worth your while to have a look at that. As you can see here I pulled this off of YouTube, and there's this British guy from the Scottish Mountaineering Council, which since they're Scotland and it's not the only mountains they got, I would assume if he's showing this on YouTube and trying to do a somewhat professional job of it, this is probably the system that they use, and this is the way you would look at it. Since you were up in the Wapta ice fields, which is here in Canada, I think if you looked around, you'd see a lot of people are dividing their ropes differently than perhaps maybe the two of you were, in the sense that they would have rescue coils, or they would have enough people on the rope. So if you have two people, you're going to save enough rope so that you can have some coils on the surface. If you have 4 or 5 people on the rope, well, 5 people, you might be extending the rope a little bit. That would be the maximum on a 50-meter rope probably. But you would always have enough rope on the surface to perform whatever rescue that you were going to be involved in. Let's see, the short roping. Well, boy, I was wondering about that one, because I get a lot of requests from people who are about short roping. Oh, and by the way, this about the crevasse rescue, you're not the only person that's asked about that. I've had about 4 people go, well, wouldn't those knots get in the way? The short roping thing, to bring some of you people up to speed, maybe if you're just rock climber or just new to mountaineering. The short roping is generally a system devised, early in the mountaineering game by guides who to move people through complex terrain safely. So you'll get terrain that it might be steppy or undulating, or places where you wouldn't want somebody to slip or fall, because a slip could turn to a fall and they could keep on moving. And so what a guide would do is tie in tie that person in to their harness, and then attach the rope to themselves, take in a few coils, and then have a number of coils in their hands, and then they'd be able to manipulate people or navigate people through terrain. And I'll call you when I need you. Right? Okay, come on up. So here we are on a super exposed ridge, and we're going to have to move together. Come on up. That's it. And you know, you always, even when you're moving, you want to kind of feel like what you're, through the rope, you can sort of just tell what the person's going to do, or just be prepared all the time. And how much, you know, caution I put into play really depends on how this person has been performing through the day, and how well I know them, and how much experience they have, and just how exposed the terrain is, because my caution levels will rise and fall depending on the level of exposure. And right here, I mean, we're very exposed. There's thousands of feet on either side, and I'm on this knife ridge, not quite knife ridge, and so my caution level is super high right now. Okay, and then you can always add some friction too by stepping back and getting the rope over a bend in the rock. Okay, if you watch the shoulder belay thing, that's quite a common, and it adds quite a bit of friction depending on how rough the rock is. And then once my person is down, I'll ask them to stay, so that, and be quite clear, don't move, because I'm coming down. Okay, you can take in the coils as I'm coming down, and we'll be prepared to go. It is technically the riskiest thing that guides do, because you aren't anchored all the time, whereas straightforward rock climbing and ice climbing, you know, even though if you're climbing on a high-end technical terrain, you're putting in protection. The belay is easy enough to manage for the client, and then you're bringing them straight up to a rock anchor. Okay, so I let the client go ahead of me. That way I can give them directions. I want you to go step on that rock over there. Okay, step on that. All right. Okay, so I brace myself. Now you can continue down. I want you to climb down to the next ledge. And if they can't see it, if I have trouble describing it, sometimes I'll pick a rock. See where this pebble's landing? And I'll throw it to that spot that I want them to go to, and that gives them the directions. Sometimes it's a little hard to describe where I want them to go. Okay, I want you to go down to that flat spot, okay? And then sit down and wait for me, Mike Barter, the greatest mountain guide the world has ever known. Go down. Go down. There you go. Climb down. There you go. Okay, go down one more step. One more step. Go down a little further. Okay. Okay. Now sit down and wait for me, okay? There we go. So, I have a well-trained client here. All right, we're going to go down this step here, this way. Okay. And I prepare myself to take the load like oof, I did right there. And I kind of keep this front foot flexed, right? So that when the shock comes, it doesn't pull me over, but I'm kind of leaning back and ready for it. There we go. Okay, sit down and wait for me, please. Sit down. There we go. And you have to be really clear about giving those directions to your client, because if they move while you're in transition from one place to another and they happen to slip or fall, it could just send you woohoo over the edge. All right, very good. Come and join me. And then we can start moving together. Right? Classic examples of a place where we'd use this kind of thing is something like Mount Assiniboine, which, you know, is like the Matterhorn, right? Mount Assiniboine is the Matterhorn of the Rockies, and the Matterhorn is the Mount Assiniboine of the European Alps. And, you know, it looks like big, intimidating terrain when you're from a distance, but you get up close to it and it's a bit of a slag heap. And if you were to try and pitch that out, pitch for pitch, you wouldn't climb it in one day, you wouldn't climb it in 2 days. This is a place where you have 4,000 feet of climbing, and you might have 3 pitches that you actually pitch it out in steep technical terrain. And the rest of the time you're short roping, and it's short little steps, terrain, the whole lower kill zone, as I call it, because it's up a basin. is the full-on short roping terrain. The techniques for it, well, I guess to take in mind here, like I have right here, this is a short roping rope that I have. It's 25 meters. If I know I'm just doing pure short roping or directing people through that terrain, I like this one because it's a full size 11 mil rope, but it kind of feels like it's 11 and a half pushing itself to 12, like a pregnant 11 mil or something. And you have a hard time pushing this through to get it on a standard belay device. But what I do like about it is that when I'm holding the rope, I get a really good feel for it. Like I feel like I can grab onto that. Whereas if I'm holding onto skinnier ropes, the smaller the diameter, the less holding power I feel I have with that. And also, if it's pure short roping that I'm doing, then I tend to use a shorter rope. That way I can just take in a few coils and then keep a number of coils in my hand. And how many coils I can comfortably hold in my hands, well, depends on the size of my hand, right? So if you have a small hand, or you're a lady or something like that, then maybe your hands are a bit smaller, so maybe 4 or 5 coils is as many as you want to hold, whereas maybe I can 6, 8 coils might be comfortable for me. That's a personal preference. It does take some practice, short roping. The thing is efficiency, right? The whole thing. That's why you want to be moving quickly and efficiently. And short roping is something that even most guides can't do correctly. But I think it is worth mentioning. I'm glad you brought it up because you can certainly, if you're taking out your kids, or you're going out with your girlfriend or your spouse, or she's taking you out, whatever the thing is, there may be some advantage to that, and if so, it may be worth mentioning. So let's take a look at a few short roping techniques. Another little thing I'll do sometimes is when I get this person, is I'll have the ropes to me and about 1 arm length away, so right there. I might put in if I'm going to be moving on flat ground for any length of time, I'll put in a hand, something for me to hold on to, and then, but it's right there so that if it comes tight, it doesn't, fall out of my, it's right sort of in that distance there, and I've got a good handhold, so I can do that once in a while if I'm going to be moving for any length of time, and I want to grab, and I have 1 or 2 people on my rope. It gives me something to grab onto rather than just gripping the rope all the time or wrapping it around my hands. Is it too hard? Well, I'll give you a hand, because that's the purpose of a guide has, right? Is that they can take you places where you can't go by yourself safely. But the problem as a guide, now this is the riskiest thing I'll ever do in my entire career. You would think climbing high-end ice or something like that is, but it isn't, because everything's pretty predictable and everything's pretty fixed. Okay, just stay there, and I'll call you when I'm ready, okay? I'll be quite clear. Okay, come on up. So here I'm using a horn to guide the rope, right? And I'm keeping the rope something between me so that if a client does fall while I was climbing and I'm short roping, I'm not anchored, so I don't want to get pulled off. You're welcome. Okay, come on up. Now, yeah. So you have to assume that the only reason that this person has been put on the earth is to pull you off the mountain. That's their sole reason for existence. And that's the way you want to approach short roping, right? Boy, we're up high, aren't we? So you want to be clear and concise with your directions, and when you ask somebody to sit down, it means to sit down. It doesn't mean stand up, it doesn't mean to fidget, it doesn't mean to be digging around in their packs. They stay where you put them until they're ready to move. Test them a few times so that they understand, and then chastise them if they're not following your directions, and keep in mind that you always have the option of reversing the process and going home if you don't think you can do this safely. And you really can't do it safely unless people are following the directions that you're implying. Okay. Another limitation would be the amount of people on the rope. Okay. Pretty much concludes this edition of Mike's Mail, and next week, 7 days, hopefully we'll get the next one out to you, and we'll answer somebody else's letter. So if you have any questions or anything that you want cleared up off of the website that may be bothering you, let me know, and hopefully I can get around. I will get around at some point answering your questions as best I can, if I'm capable of doing it.